got it that time. Ah. Wow, home sweet home. Feels so good to be back. More than 2,000 years ago, a new culture would arise on the North American continent. Like their ancestors, they would direct their manpower into the construction of massive earthworks. But this culture, today called the Hopewell, took this tradition to the next level. Over the course of the next 700 years, the Hopewell would create earthworks of such monumental size and technical complexity that they truly stand in a league of their own. While many of these achievements were destroyed during the expansion of the American Empire, those that do survive today are nothing short of breathtaking. But in this video, we will forego the well-preserved and curated sites in favor of something much more mysterious. A bizarre anomaly hidden in plain sight. Modern LIDAR imagery of long plowed fields and woodlots reveals the ghost of a strange earthwork. The tiny isolated fragments that have been found consist of two parallel walls, and are theorized by some to be the only remains of the Hopewell culture's greatest achievement. An ancient road that traveled nearly 60 miles in an almost perfectly straight line. Today, we are going to be visiting these ruins for ourselves. We'll be learning all the most recent discoveries in this topic and meeting the archaeologists behind them. Howdy friends, my name is Milo Rossi, and today it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Great Hopewell Road. Oh, as you guys can see, it's winter in the studio again. I enjoyed all 10 minutes of summer. I enjoyed all 5 seconds of summer. And it is a balmy 40 degrees. You know, I sometimes wonder what people who just like stumble across my videos think if they haven't like seen anything else that I've done. Like, oh, who's this guy? This topic looks interesting. Views are pretty solid. Oh, he's in a room that's falling apart surrounded by trash bags. Look, I know the trash bags have been here for a long time, but they're actually gonna be going out at the beginning of this upcoming week, okay? So I don't wanna hear it. Also, take a moment, look around you a little bit, okay? I think we all have a little bit of cleaning up to do, all right? Today I am headed to the only place that you would expect to find an unbelievable archaeological site. Somewhere more spectacular and romantic than Egypt or Italy or Mexico, it's Central Ohio. 2,000 years ago, this part of North America became the nexus of the Hopewell culture, with much of their architecture and material culture beginning to crystallize on the banks of the Scioto River near the city of Chillicothe. The Hopewell culture would persist for nearly 700 years, and throughout this time build some astonishing constructions. Today, the best preserved of these are the Great Circle Earthwork and the Octagon Earthworks in the modern city of Newark, Ohio. These two sites are absolutely spectacular, and at one time were actually part of one large ceremonial complex. However, everything except the Circle and Octagon were destroyed by the systematic expansion of the city of Newark. Today, I am headed to Newark to meet Dr. Brad Lepper. He is an archaeologist and an expert in the Hopewell culture and their earthworks. And he is a friend of mine. Aww. Many of you will remember that I did 2 videos with Brad earlier this year on the Great Circle and Octagon, with one of them taking a deep dive into the archaeology of these sites and the other one talking about the spectacular geometry and astronomical alignments. Like I said in those videos, Brad is the guy. He is kind of a preeminent voice in the research of these sites. So it's really an honor for me to be able to platform his work and be able to share it with all of you. And if you get a kick out of this video, I highly recommend you check out the others because they go really in depth in some amazing archaeology that I'm just not going to cover at all in this video. At the end of the second video, where we discussed astronomical alignments and sacred geometry, Brad and I had a little tangent about the Great Hopewell Road.
I think this was a highway that extended perhaps 60 miles and connected it with Chillicothe.
Wow.
A ceremonial highway.
Despite this being a footnote in this video, y'all seemed really interested in it. And I don't blame you, because I was as well. Your interest was so palpable, in fact, that since those videos released, I've been working with Brad to co-author my very first paper. Yes, I know, thank you, crazy. It's not published yet. And in it, I discussed the public's interest in the Great Hopewell Road and what we can do to channel it. And so I have you guys to thank for the twofold reasons I now find myself back in Ohio. 1, for Brad and I to present our paper at the Ohio Archaeological Council. And 2, to work with Brad and other researchers to create an actual dedicated video about the Great Hopewell Road. There's a few videos about it on YouTube, but it's something that is kind of largely unknown. And so it's a huge honor for me to be kind of the first big channel to cover this and hopefully help push it into the mainstream. It may seem like Brad is the right guy to talk to about this site because of his knowledge of the Hopewell culture, and you'd be correct. But his relationship with this site is much deeper because Brad is actually the guy that discovered it.
Where would it go if you completely traced it? Well, this was back in the 90s before GPS, so I'm using USGS quadrangle maps laid out on the floor of that museum, and a ruler and a protractor, drawing them across them. and this goes, it points directly to the center of Chillicothe.
Oh my God, that is amazing. Something that I think perfectly illustrates how close Brad's relationship is with the Great Hopewell Road is that Brad is the one that coined the term Great Hopewell Road. He saw a similarity between this road and some of the Native American roads in the American Southwest, and he was inspired by the famous Chuckhoan Great North Road, and that is where the term Great Hopewell Road came from, which is another theme you'll see with this, that if there is a name for something in sort of the Great Hopewell Road canon, and you don't know why it's named that, there's a non-zero chance that it's just because Brad said so. What Brad had discovered is that these parallel walls made more or less of a beeline towards Chillicothe. This is pretty significant because there was a very strong connection between the sites at Newark and the sites at Chillicothe. As I already stated, this is kind of where the Hopewell culture really crystallized, where their architecture, technology, and material culture began to sort of take shape. The enormous complex at Newark, on the other hand, is sort of the synthesis of all of it. It is believed to have been constructed as one large project, like a pre-planned city. This site incorporates many of the traditions that were developed at Newark, from things as simple as the shapes themselves, to things as complicated as octagon-shaped earthworks that are aligned to the 18.6-year cycle of the moon's trajectory across the sky, to consistent measurements and diameters that show up over and over again, implying to us that the Hopewell had some sort of standard unit of measurement. All of these things that were sort of tooled over in Chillicothe were put on display in their most grand extent at Newark. And so it would make sense that there would be a strong connection between the ancestral homeland and population center of Chillicothe and the newly built ceremonial center of the Newark earthworks. Newark is hypothesized to be sort of like a pilgrimage site, and one with an immense sphere of influence. While little excavation has been possible at the Newark sites specifically, other Hopewell sites have yielded artifacts like copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf of Mexico, and obsidian from the Yellowstone caldera. Needless to say, if you were east of the Rockies 2,000 years ago, this was the place to be. Many of the groups that were able to visit this site were able to do so because it was strategically positioned at the confluence of 3 rivers. Rivers at the time acted like highways and would have allowed a lot of people to get to this site. Despite how intentionally accessible the Newark site is by water, there's actually no real direct water route that you can take to get there from Chillicothe. As strange as that is for the culture that actually built it, this could necessitate the construction of a road in order to get there. So with Chillicothe being located at the very edge of the Appalachian Plateau and nothing but more or less flat land between them and Newark, it would make sense that the Hopewell culture might have leveraged their enormous manpower to build a road directly there. So anyway, that's kind of a long-winded explanation of sort of the background of this site, some of the evidence for this site, the initial evidence, and then also why this is something that actually can be supported by a little bit of logic as well. So with all that framework out of the way, let's get into the real meat of this. And there is no better place to start than a small, unassuming archaeological site known as the Vanvoris Walls. The Vanvoris Walls are one of the only surviving and probably best researched sections of the Great Hopewell Road. You might be wondering why they're called that. And it's because Brad said so. These parallel walls are actually noted in antique maps of this area. James and Charles Salisbury were 2 of the first to map these earthworks all the way back in 1862. And so these antique maps have become an invaluable resource because they show the Newark earthworks in their former glory, including many sections that today no longer exist. Among these, potentially the Great Hopewell Road. Now, the Salisburys ended up following this path for about 6 miles to the southwest before the swampy, overgrown terrain became impassable and they ended up turning back. Meaning we really have no idea how much longer this road would have carried on for if they had decided to follow it. And the only reason the Vanvoris walls still exist is because they are in an isolated woodlot. It was kind of swampier than everywhere around it, and so people just didn't bother plowing it. And so it became overgrown and was used for firewood, and because of its relative inaccessibility to the land around it, this tiny section of road was able to survive while everything around it was completely wiped out. And you'll see this as a trend when we dive into the full scope of research for this site later, is that really the only places where fragments of the Great Hopewell Road still exist are in woodlots. Okay, I have yapped long enough, and I think all that context brings us to the perfect moment now to go meet Brad in the field and try and find this site for ourselves. How's it going, Brad? Finding anything?
This is going to be embarrassing on the video. It is so overgrown. I'm having trouble finding anything at the moment. One thing I'm going to be looking for here is like the biggest trees, because the biggest trees are on the remnants of the road.
This is cool forest forensics, I guess. I didn't really think about that, is you have to I guess the older trees have been here. The biggest trees have been here the longest.
Yeah.
So those are probably on top of it.
Yeah, but this is the most overgrown I've ever seen this place.
I was gonna say, I don't think it's, you know, I don't think anyone would fault you for looking at this and not being able to tell what's going on. How did you end up finding this in the first place?
Well, we'd heard that there might be sort of remnants preserved somewhere. And back in the 90s with my colleagues Jeff Gill and Paul Hogue, who then was the director of the Licking County Archaeology and Landmark Society, which no longer exists. I think we started at Geller Park, which is where we know that a stretch of it stretched through a corner of that park, and then just started walking southwest following the bearing, waded across a little stream over there in that tree line, and found it, and it was much easier to see back then. So this stake, when we were doing our trenches over here, this marks like the center line of the wall.
All right, here we go. Wow.
So we're on the alignment of the westernmost wall of the Great Hopewell Road. The road bed is over here. 200 feet over there is the other wall right on the edge of the forest. And here you can see why this is a big challenge to work in.
Wow.
It's gotten overgrown. Some of the big trees are down here.
Does this shows up a little bit on LIDAR, right? Where we are right now?
Yes, it does show up clearly on LIDAR, even through the trees.
Man, that really goes to show how good LIDAR is, because I'm standing here and like I see it in certain places, but like when I'm standing here, I'm like, cool, it's the forest. Like, there's not a hell of a lot going on there to the naked eye, you know? So this tip up here is potentially a little chunk of road.
Absolutely, it's certainly the same material that the road is built of, even if it's not exactly on it, because the road was built by scraping aside dirt from inside the walls and then piling it up on either side, which makes it really hard to identify when plows come along and just plow that dirt back down into the hole. Geophysical testing is really sort of difficult when it's the same material put back into the same hole. It's not showing a big distinction. Like with many Hopewell earthworks, they're using different kinds of soil. And even when that's plowed flat, it has different soil properties that can show up with geophysical testing. These kinds of things are much more elusive, much more obscure and hard to identify once they've been plowed flat.
So it's soil that's brought in from another site that would be easier to identify.
Yeah, because if this is the soil, but you're bringing in some red clay to use.
Even if it does get plowed down, you can identify a strata. Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Wow, interesting. Ayo, reshoot day. Big moves though. Trash bags are gone, and so is my ceiling. And I haven't set up my box lights again yet, so sorry if everything looks different, okay? This is just how we do things here. Something that I forgot to mention is that when I went to Brad to film for the Great Hopewell Road and present our paper, we also did a live show together, which was an awful lot of fun and sort of served as a precursor to the Northeast tour that I did between October and November. And we also set up this event as a fundraiser where I donated all of the sales of my meet and greet tickets to the Octagon Earthworks. And thanks to all of you guys, we managed to raise about $2,000 for them and another $200 or $300 from donations during the actual talk. So thank you guys very much. There's also a donation page for the Newark Earthworks that's always open, so if you feel inclined, there's a link to that in the description. But if you're watching this within just a couple weeks after it's been released, the Octagon Earthworks is actually right now being voted on as one of America's top 20 new attractions for USA Today. And you can vote for it right now, and you should vote for it right now. It's so damn easy, we'll even play a screen recording of it on screen. You don't have to sign up for anything. There's no, annoying stuff like that where you have to put in your email. It's literally just click the link in my description and click on this little button. And boom, cast your vote. Help give the Octagon Earthworks the respect that it deserves and hopefully be able to boost it to the top of that list. So with that understood, you may be asking yourself a very logical question. And that is, so how do you actually prove this? How much evidence do we actually have, and what else are we looking for in order to say beyond reasonable doubt that this very well may be a real feature? So now that we've gotten our boots on the ground, let's take a 30,000-foot view of this and look at all of the data and research that we currently have on the Great Hopewell Road. As you can see, there really isn't anything to see for the majority of the Great Hopewell Road. We went to probably the best preserved site, and even then, It kind of just looks like a forest. Because these traces are pretty much invisible to the naked eye, most of the greatest developments and research of the Great Hopewell Road has come from modern technology. Chiefly one that I've mentioned in this video and we've talked about a lot before, it is of course LIDAR. I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to give you like a good explanation, but it's pretty much a satellite that can bounce things off the ground and see how long it takes for the things to get back up to the satellite, and then it measures that time to get a distance. And it can pretty much get like a topographic map of the ground that's like insanely detailed. Oh, and it can see through trees, which is crazy. So they've been using this to find like lost cities in the Amazon rainforest, all this crazy stuff. LIDAR is the bomb. LIDAR also has a very special place in my heart, because back when I was studying at the University of Maine, I was about to go do my field school, and then COVID happened. So I got to do my field school online. Now, it wasn't like trying to actually do like a field school digitally. We just worked with digital resources instead. And my research was on the erosion of shell middens on the coast of Maine. And to do that, we had to go through a lot of LIDAR maps. I love LIDAR. I think it's absolutely awesome. It's the best thing since sliced bread, essentially. It's the best thing since going to an absolute rager at the Great Circle 2,000 years ago. Yo, it's me again. I mean, I don't know who else it would have been. Who'd you expect? I wanted to pop in real quick to let you guys know about the new merch. I mentioned this stuff in my tour recap video, but I want to mention it again here. We have a whole bunch of new enamel pins. We started using a new pin manufacturer, and let me tell you, these bad boys are high quality. So if you still got a little energy in your holiday spending spree and want to support the channel and get a nice little accoutrement for your backpack or your jacket, the link is in the description. Along with that, we are also selling off the last of the tour merch. Things like the Northeast Tour pin and the t-shirts are all limited stock. When they are gone, they are gone. So if you want them, this is your last chance. All of these designs are made by a real person without a single AI involved, and we greatly appreciate every purchase. It helps us run the channel and keeps educational content free and available for so many people online. So thank you very much. It means the world. Anyway, link to that is in the description, and we can get back into it now. Okay, I also want to give a really big thank you right here to Jamie Davis. He's one of the researchers who is largely responsible for a lot of the data that I am about to sort of go over here. The LIDAR maps that you're going to see have been sourced by him. He gave an unbelievable presentation at the meeting in Ohio that was super inspiring to me. He is one of many great researchers working on uncovering the Great Hopewell Road, and I just want to give him due acknowledgement here because we would not have any of this data if it wasn't for him and his team. So thank you, Jamie, appreciate it. LIDAR imagery comes at different sort of elevations, and Ohio is currently in the process of increasing the resolution of their statewide LIDAR surveys. And as you can imagine, you need a pretty sensitive LIDAR height map in order to actually see the remains of these walls. But it is from this new LIDAR data that the most recent discoveries in the Great Hopewell Road have been made. So far, the Great Hopewell Road has been found to exist at 5 sections, all of them sort of originating from a point at the Octagon Earthworks. The first section is the Vanvoris walls, about 2 miles away. After that, researchers found a second section about 4 miles away, another about 6 miles away, a fourth one about 7 miles away, and a final stretch about 8 miles away. As of the creation of this video, this is the farthest point that the Great Hopewell Road has been traced to, ending about 8 miles from Newark, just north of Buckeye Lake. So why have researchers not really found anything more south of here? There's kind of 2 major reasons. One is that each surviving section of the Great Hopewell Road is preserved in a woodlot, and south of here there's a lot less woodlots and a lot more farmland, meaning that fragments that could be here have been much more heavily degraded. The second reason is that we simply just don't have good LIDAR data for the area southwest of here, or this data hasn't been thoroughly analyzed yet. Combing through these individual parcels of LIDAR data is time-consuming work. However, if you kind of extrapolate the line out past this farmland, you eventually get to a couple more big clusters of woodlots around Lancaster and the other town that I'm forgetting the name of. Baltimore, what the hell? So there's a pretty good chance that if the Great Hopewell Road did actually extend this far, there may be some fragments of it left in the woodlots near Baltimore and Lancaster. But again, the LIDAR data in this area just hasn't been thoroughly surveyed, so we simply don't know yet. Okay, so now we kind of got 2 points. We got Chillicothe and we got Newark, and between them you can draw a straight line. But we also now have an 8-mile sample of individual data points that we can actually trace a trajectory through. And here's where things are a little bit strange. If we trace through these 8 data points, did I just say 8 data points? I meant to say 5. There's 5 data points. Where the hell did 8 come from? If we connect the dots between these 5 data points, we see something strange. The Hopewell Road doesn't actually travel in a pin straight line. Instead, it curves very slightly to the north. The jury is out right now on whether or not this is intentional or just sort of a byproduct of trying to make a straight line that goes 60 miles. Since it's such a tiny data set and it's still more than 50 miles away from Chillicothe, there's a lot that we kind of have to interpret. If this curve is unintentional and just sort of a margin of error in the road's construction, it makes a pretty solid straight line towards Chillicothe. But where exactly in Chillicothe? There are many different Hopewell sites around Chillicothe, and it's currently speculated that if the road was actually heading here, it was heading to one of 2 sites, either the High Bank Works in the south or the Hopewell Mound Group to the north. Both of these sites are also large ceremonial Hopewell earthworks and incorporate much of the same geometry that is seen at the Newark site, just on a much larger scale, implying some sort of connection between these sites. Now let's look at a different scenario where we assume that the curvature of this road is intentional. If we follow this path, it takes us to a location about 20 miles north of Chillicothe called Circleville. I bet you could never imagine why the settlers named it Circleville. This also significant Hopewell site is connected to Chillicothe by the Scioto River and would also make a fairly logical destination. High Banks Works, Hopewell Mound Group, and Circleville are all reasonable destinations to sort of speculate for this road. But again, for a lot of this distance, we're sort of just flying blind. The last of our tiny set of 5 data points ends about 35 miles from Circleville and almost 50 miles from Chillicothe, with an enormous swath of unsurveyed guesswork in between. Now, there's one other note I want to make quickly on this that I think is just worth saying out loud. The final section of the Great Hopewell Road is about 8 miles from Newark. It's preserved in a woodlot. It is functionally no different than any of the other sections. But there's kind of a weird thing here that you might see. It is like right next to this weird flat top hill. When I was at the Ohio Archaeological Council meeting, me and some other folks were talking about this quite a bit. We genuinely have no idea what this is. Jamie Davis, who's been instrumental in this particular research, said he looked back at aerial photos going all the way back to the 50s, which is as far back as it goes. There's no real change there, so whatever it is, it predates that, I guess. I have no idea if this anomaly is some sort of earthwork, whether it's related to the Great Hopewell Road, whether it is just completely unrelated and it's like an old farm field or something like that. But it is significant enough that it had my head spinning for a good while I was actually in Ohio, and I feel like it's worth mentioning here. But we don't know anything about it, and it is located directly next to the final section of the road. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's not, I really don't know. I just felt the need to say it out loud here because I think it's kind of an interesting little mystery. Another researcher who has contributed greatly to the understanding of the Great Hopewell Road is John Soderberg. John and his team excavated a trench in an agricultural field near the Vanvoris walls in order to obtain sort of a cross-section of where the Great Hopewell Road may have been, allowing this team to analyze the soil profile to look for any anomalies. In this particular project, John and his team focused on digging a trench across the length of the Great Hopewell Road. The goal of this trench was not to excavate artifacts, but to analyze a soil profile. By getting a cross-section of the ground, archaeologists can identify disturbances, anomalies, and previously inhabited layers. Utilizing LIDAR maps, John and his team identified an area to the north of the Vanvoris walls where you can see a faint shadow of the Great Hopewell Road in a field. The team ended up picking 2 sections along this line to dig trenches, one to the north called Trench 1 and one to the south called Trench 2. Very creative, I know. By comparing both LIDAR data and extrapolating the walls present at the Vanvoris walls just to the south, you can see in these images how the path of the Great Hopewell Road likely passed right through where these 2 trenches were dug. And sure enough, these trenches yielded some pretty interesting results. I want you to look at this composite image of the soil profile on the west side of Trench 2. The left side of this image begins between the 2 walls in the middle of the Great Hopewell Road. And as we pan from left to right, we are moving across the roadbed, passing through the theorized location of the northern wall, and then ending in the land outside of the road's boundaries. Like all things at the Great Hopewell Road, it's a little hard to tell what you're looking at, but you'll probably notice some things that stand out. Chiefly this very noticeable line that you can see here in the section thought to be outside of the wall's perimeter. This line is completely natural and found in almost all soil profiles. It runs between the soil's dark and nutrient-rich O and A horizons at the top and its lighter B horizon at the bottom. As we move back towards the roadbed, you'll probably notice that this line becomes a little fuzzy for a moment and then resumes. And as we continue to the left, we can see that not only does it resume, but it becomes sharply defined. If we compare the AB horizon line from the left side of the image to the one on the right, you can see how noticeably sharper the left one appears. Now, it's important to note that the data here is still inconclusive, but it is possible that this data could show the highly trafficked road bed of the Great Hopewell Road in the form of the sharp AB horizon on the left-hand side, the former location of the north wall represented by the murky AB horizon sort of towards the right-hand side, and finally, the less compacted, more natural AB horizon of the landscape beyond the wall. Proving this is an uphill battle, as the survey area has been subjected to 150 years of plowing, damaging this site beyond recognition. Even so, this data is pretty intriguing, and while more research will certainly be needed before coming to any conclusion, it is amazing to think that what we might be looking at here is the very roadbed once traversed by travelers 2,000 years ago. Despite this site still being largely unknown by the general public, you can see that there is a lot of active research going on with it. This is one of the reasons I think this story is so exciting, because there's new information coming out about it all the time. And while I've talked about the work of Brad, Jamie, and John here, they are just a handful of the many researchers working diligently to understand this site. Needless to say, there is substantial and ongoing research happening, but that fact has unfortunately not spared the mystery of the Great Hopewell Road being misrepresented and misconstrued for some sort of nefarious purposes.
Also, early on in my career, I'd give tours for groups of Mormon missionaries that would come to the Great Circle, and they would continually ask me, like, well, do you find signs of warfare? And I says, no, the Hopewell period, insofar as we know, was like one of the most peaceful periods from before and after. We've never found Hopewell remains with a spear point stuck in their ribs or anything, or bashed in skulls or broken arms from fending off a blow. And their interaction sphere stretched across much of North America. So if there was much warfare going on, it wouldn't have been safe to travel, and that interaction sphere wouldn't have been possible. So there's so much evidence that warfare wasn't a part of this. That's not why they were built. But yet that's what the Book of Mormon describes these things as, fortifications. And after one of these tours, one of the Mormon missionaries that was there, gave me a Book of Mormon. And I said, have you ever read it? And I said, no, but thank you. And I took it in, and over a couple of weeks, I sort of read it. Mm-hmm. And I highlighted every time it mentioned something that would leave some evidence in the archaeological record, like old world grains being grown here, wheat and barley and things like that, or chariots, or horses, or metal spears and shields, all kinds of weird things that are like unique to the old world, but were never here. So there's no archaeological evidence whatsoever. I mean, indigenous people built this, not lost tribes of Israel, not Nephites or whoever people are these supposed to be. And it's not just a faith system. It's actually sort of, it is absolutely racism, because it's not just Mormons thinking these things belong to their religion. It's all these Europeans coming in saying, hey, that's really cool. Those Indians couldn't have built it because they're savages. So that's what's at the heart of all this. And you don't want to call people racists just because they have different ideas about what the earthworks are. But fundamentally, when you say indigenous people were too stupid to build those, that can only be interpreted in a context of racism. Mm-hmm. So, however you frame it, whether it's, religious people, lost tribes of Israel coming in, or whether it's Phoenicians, or whether it's Romans, or ancient Greeks, or ancient aliens, you're taking away the achievement of the indigenous American Indians that puts them on the level, because these are World Heritage Sites now, so it puts them on the level of all the ancient architecture all over the world that expresses this incredible spirit and grandeur. And to say, yeah, but they couldn't do it. That's my principal concern with these ideas, however they're framed, whether they're framed in a religious context or not. And if your faith requires you to think those indigenous people were too stupid and they were built actually by white people, when there is absolutely no archaeological evidence whatsoever to confirm that or to suggest that there's even a possibility, yeah, you've lost me.
It's a problem, yeah. Well said, very well said. Yeah, and that can be a tough thing too, because again, a lot of folks, at least that I find, that you know, kind of end up in the pseudo-archaeological world, whether it be because of, you know, a faith system they were raised in, or, you know, a video they watched on the internet. It can be very hard to discuss those undertones of racism with those folks, because it's very easy to interpret that as being like, well, you are calling me a racist, and like, well, I'm not racist, I'm not, you know, trying to do this. But it's like, yes, I'm not saying that you necessarily are. If you were, I would tell you, you know, but it's that what the belief is hinged on is something that is fundamentally racist and white supremacist.
To get this visceral understanding of what that means, Chief Glenna Wallace of the Eastern Shawnee, she's given many presentations for us, and one of the things she almost always says is that for all of her life, she has only ever heard her ancestors referred to as savages. But now, with World Heritage inscription, she's hearing her ancestors referred to as geniuses. And what a sea change that must be for Indigenous people, to see their ancestors lifted up and inscribed on the World Heritage list. That's one of the things I'm most proud of in my career, is helping, being a small part of that achievement to get those sites on the World Heritage list. Wow. Because they deserve to be there.
Totally, wow. It's both disappointing and unsurprising to me to hear how much this site is frequently talked about in sort of conspiracy circles. Thankfully, unlike a lot of other really amazing sites, this one has yet to become defined by conspiracy theories, which is part of my inspiration for making this video now, in hopes to put real good information out about the actual ongoing research before conspiracy theorists can sort of sink their claws into it. As always, it can be very challenging to talk to people about the conspiracies they believe, especially when religion and faith is involved. And I think the most important thing for us to remember when having discussions that do have that religious component is that no one is trying to change someone's religious views. With belief systems that carry pseudoarchaeology as a core component, Mormonism probably being the most prevalent, it's very challenging to find a way to sort of break down the information without attacking someone for their religious views. I don't want to go too deep into this in this video, but I've sort of been trying to synthesize some sort of more formal video discussing this phenomenon, because I don't think that many people really know how much pseudoarchaeology there is in the Book of Mormon. Along with that, Brad also did give me his annotated copy of the Book of Mormon. So, thanks, Brad. It's probably one of the only conditions under which I would gleefully accept a Book of Mormon. I was gonna show it here, but I just moved a bookshelf and there's books everywhere, so I don't know where it is. But believe me, it's in this house somewhere. So I'd have to think quite a while before I actually make a video like that, because it's obviously a touchy subject. But I have a few other creators I got my eye on for when the time comes to make that video, because I think it would be, I think it's an important one. Milo from the Future update, I found it. This bad boy right here is Brad's annotated Book of Mormon. I found it when I was, you know, tearing my ceiling down. I was in a hat with a bunch of gold tablets, but those didn't look important, so I threw them away and kept this. Okay, anyway, that brings us to something very important about what we're discussing right now. And that is that this is still a hypothesis. Since this video is looking for evidence, I'm obviously speaking about it with a level of confidence, but I think it's exceptionally important for me to state very clearly that this is still ongoing research. Many researchers, myself included, and potentially many of you, think that there is ample outcoming evidence to support this hypothesis, but it's important to keep our minds nimble that right now what we're talking about is not a wild speculative theory like in the fringes of pseudoscience, or a well-researched and concretely proven discovery. This is part of the reason why I was so driven to actually make this video, because we talk a lot about pseudoscience on this channel, and when you hear so much nonsense over and over and over again, it can kind of like, you know, make your mind a little bit resistant to hearing new hypotheses that sound a little bit too good to be true. But the Great Hopewell Road is something that has all of the grandeur that makes pseudoscience so exciting, but is an actual site that has real research coming out done by actual archaeologists. So it's my hope that by diving into this research, I'm kind of giving you guys a picture of how actual research differs from the bogus pseudoscience. For those of us that have been with this channel for a while, we are all too familiar with seeing really amazing archaeological sites be misrepresented. And I'm sure you feel the same frustration I do of seeing a real, genuine scientific mystery just sort of being twisted into something that it isn't. To some degree, I unfortunately think this is a bit of an inevitability. When something is mysterious, you can make it anything you want. But this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important to talk about the Great Hopewell Road, because while it is a great mystery, it is one with real scientific evidence, and is illustrative of how important it is to admit when we don't know something in the world of science. By how admitting when you don't know something, it opens the door to be able to ask questions and study and research and ultimately get to the ground truth. Research is obviously ongoing with the Great Hopewell Road, and I am very proud to say that I am kind of involved with it now. And so I promise you that this will not be the only video I make on it. And I'm even looking for ways to try and get all of us involved. I have this idea right now that I don't know if I will be able to make work, but I'm saying it out loud anyway. I really want to see if I can find a way to get the LIDAR data parcels easily available and accessible so that we could do like a scavenger hunt. I think it could be a really cool way of doing some citizen science by showing you guys how to access the data and having everyone just go nuts on this LIDAR data and see how many segments we can find. Because right now, that's a limiting factor where the scientists and researchers working on it can't spend days upon days poring over these parcels. But if we crowdsource that and have a way that people can submit anomalies they find, we could potentially find like all the other segments of the road that exist if there are any. So I'm working on this with Brad. I don't know how this is gonna work or if it's gonna work, but I wanted to say it out loud because I want you to at least know that I'm thinking of you and I want you to be involved in this. But as for the near future of the Vanvoris walls, at least, the future is thankfully looking bright.
And it's so important because through LIDAR we found other segments that show up in sort of microscopic relief that shows up in LIDAR. But here, if we get this cleared, they're observable. You can see them, you can experience them. Obviously, we shouldn't walk on them as much as we might like, but it's almost the only way to find them now. This was nothing like what it was like when I was here in the 90s. So like, we know we're standing in the road, but there's nothing here. Here to come here, walk through into the woods and say, there's the wall. It was awesome. And we were hoping even then that somehow we could have it preserved so that this intact remnant could be experienced and people could appreciate it, if not quite the same way as they do the Great Circle or the Octagon. This is still, I think, a really significant component of the Newark Earthworks. And I hope we can get it looking better than this.
Yeah, I'm sure cleaned up a little bit, it'll be honestly a lot easier to see. I mean, at some of the other sites that have been plowed pretty heavily, even just the interpretive mowing is enough to be able to get an idea for it, you know, and I'm sure without the visual noise of, you know, a forest, you know, here, I bet you'd be able to see quite a bit more than what we're seeing right now. We've talked a lot about development at a lot of these sites, and oftentimes it goes hand in hand with the destruction of everything. So what does that hold for this little section of the road?
It's really exciting. We've got more or less guarantees that these walls will be preserved and that there's going to be a sort of a development of all kinds of things, sort of like Easton, you know, in Columbus with shops. There's going to be, I think, a government center. I don't know if it's the town hall will be part of this, apartments. This is the plan at any rate. And not only have the developers decided to preserve this section with the intact walls, but to make it a corridor to sort of go all through sort of the center of this community to be sort of a walkway, but also a tribute to the indigenous ancient Hopewell culture that people can sort of keep following the wall on this green space, all the parallel walls.
Wow.
And hopefully we can get some interpretive signage down here that we could help them write, and so that people could be learning more about what's here. Like, why is this long straight road going off weird and it's just a big green space?
Wow.
Because it's preserving a portion of this corridor.
That's beautiful. That's, I feel like, a really good way of being able to pay tribute to this. Because as it is right now, you know, my gut is like, oh, thank God it's still here, and, you know, it's kind of off the beaten trail where no one's messing with it, you know. But it would also be beautiful to see it returned to something that actually allows people to learn from it. It's no good if it's just sitting here deteriorating. And I think that, you know, unfortunately, development is something which, whether we like it or not, is going to continue happening. So to see a development happening in a way that is not only reverent to what is here currently, which is a lot compared to how it's been historically,
Yeah.
but is also reverent to the context of what was here and what this was a part of. That's pretty amazing. That's a real step in the right direction, I think.
Oh yeah, and if it's a community, if there's like apartment buildings and people are out here walking their dogs and taking their kids for walks and playing in this area, and they get a sense of what it represents, I would hope they would treasure that, and it wouldn't be abused, and it would be sort of a symbol of the community, that it links them to the grandeur of the Hopewell.
From this section of heavily deteriorated walls practically lost in the forest, we thought it only made sense to make our way to the much more spectacular Octagon Earthworks, where the Great Hopewell Road is thought to have terminated. It's here that the Salisburys began their 6-mile walk when they were creating their map back in 1862. While the history of the Hopewell Earthworks is frequently bleak, the future of the Octagon is actually surprisingly bright. For years, it was home to a golf course, which is arguably the most heavy-handed analogy for America's reverence of its indigenous sites that you could possibly come up with. But anyway, as of this January, the site is finally beginning its transition back into the hands of the public, and the golf course on it is being dismantled. And to cap it all off, the Octagon has earned the high and much-deserved honor of becoming a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But rather than seeing this site in its entirety, Brad and I are here today to see 2 small, unassuming earthworks thought to have once been the terminus of the Great Hopewell Road.
It's probably been heavily restored by the National Guard when they were here, because they did a lot of that work, but it was intact enough that they were able to restore it here.
Yeah.
And you see it's a V here because it's an intersection of 2 roads. This is the Great Hopewell Road that goes maybe 60 miles, maybe less. This was a separate avenue that would have gone and made a couple of turns around the big pond and connected with the square. And then from the square, people could go to the Cherry Valley Ellipse where the burial mounds were. They could go to the Great Circle. So the square is kind of a nexus, an intersection where like all the roads meet. Someday I hope the Vanvoris walls are able to be put into condition where it can be appreciated like this, and you've got 2 parallel avenues in a pretty spacious area.
Yeah.
And if that development proceeds as we hope, you can keep walking for a long time and sort of have that long avenue experience.
Oh, that would be perfect. That would be so cool. I hope they decide to do that. That would be just such a unique way of doing an interpretive archaeological site, of being able to not only restore what's there, but kind of continue it as like a ghost through the middle of whatever the development is.
And if this LIDAR research develops so that we can actually define the route of the Hopewell Road for however far it went, turning that into like a bike trail would be like awesome.
That would be really, really cool. Yeah, reviving the original ceremonial avenue.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool, yeah. What can people do to actually get involved to help with sites like this?
Wow. Experience them, share their experiences with people, whether it's on social media, whether it's just talking to your friends saying these are incredible sites, you have to go see them. Donate to the Ohio History Connection, to the Hopewell Culture National Historical Park. The National Historical Park actually has a friends group, the Friends of Hopewell Culture National Historical Park. Support them, become members if you're anywhere in the area. I think you can even join it if you live in California, could be a part of this. There are friends groups associated with the Ohio History Connection. We've got groups that raise funds for us. Donate to our World Heritage Fund. That's I think, for me, to help this place, that would be the most important thing. Donate there so that we can get funds. They won't replace the millions of dollars we'd hope to get from the state for this, but any donation to help us remove the golf course infrastructure, to take out some of the trees that might damage earthworks, some of those donations don't have to be that big, and it would help.
Yeah, all steps in the right direction, you know?
Yeah.
Those of you who remember the last 2 videos I did on the Newark Earthworks will remember this poster set designed by my wonderful partner. And while these posters are no longer in print on the shop, they can now be acquired at the gift shop of the Great Circle Earthworks, which is very cool. It's crazy to have like an actual thing from the channel be shown at a museum gift shop at a UNESCO World Heritage Site. That's pretty awesome. So when you go and visit the Great Circle, which I know you will, make sure to check out one of these bad boys in the gift shop. And of course, tell them that Milo sent you. word of mouth is very important. A year ago, I had never heard the term the Great Hopewell Road, but in the time since then, it has not only become one of my hyperfixations, but one of the first major archaeological projects that I'm actually personally involved with. This is obviously very personally exciting for me, but also a huge honor to be someone who is as involved with this project and kind of being one of the first people to really bring it to a wide public audience. And by being actively involved in this research, it's my hope that this can kind of serve as the first video in many more to come that will sort of catalog the development and understanding of this site and offer all of you a unique view into how science goes from not knowing something to researching it to find the answer. And hopefully, if I can find a way to do it, involve all of you in helping make this discovery happen. I'm also so immensely grateful to see all of y'all's enthusiasm with this. Again, it was your comments showing interest in the Great Hopewell Road from its one mention in the previous two videos that brought me back to this site and got me involved with it. So like it or not, you guys are now just as involved with this as I am. We're all going down together, everybody. This is gonna be fun. That said, I am really looking forward to your feedback on this video. Your thoughts on the Great Hopewell Road, ideas for research, pretty much anything. I would love to hear what you have to say. I also have to give a really personal thank you to researchers like John, Jamie, and many others who are helping make this project actually happen, as well as to the Ohio Archaeological Council, where Brad and I presented our paper, and to the Ohio History Connection, who protect and manage the Great Circle, the Octagon, and many more. I'm grateful for both the work they do making these sites available for the public, and also for working with myself and my team so diligently now on our third visit. And of course, I have to thank the guy, Dr. Brad Lepper. Brad, you already know that you're the man, all right? You've proven it in this video. I don't need to hype you up anymore here. But thank you for taking the time to share your expertise with myself and the rest of us here. You are awesome. And lastly, I'd like to give a huge thank you to my editorial team, who make everything that you see here possible. If it wasn't for them, it would just be me standing alone in a freezing, crumbling studio. Everything from transitions to images to animations was made by a real person, part of my wonderful team. Thank you so much. Could not do without you guys. And a last reminder to go nominate the Octagon Earthworks for America's top 20 best new attractions, and to check out some merch on the way out. It would mean a lot, and I greatly appreciate the support. If you enjoyed this video and aren't done doing your dishes or are still, locked in on that video game you're playing, I have plenty more like it. Go check them out. Or share it with your friend who also needs there to be something playing at all times to drown out the silence inside their own heads. You know the one I'm talking about. I would like to thank you all so very much for watching. We're gonna have one more fun little video at the end of this year. My team and I are just about to go on our winter break, but on behalf of all of us, thank you for an amazing year. We will see you all again in January. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Milo Rossi. Remember to stay curious, stay inquisitive, and happy holidays. Gotta stay hydrated. Like third siren today. This is the most action northern New England has gotten since the French and Indian War. And, here, I got a question for you. We were looking around this tip-up stand
Sure.
at some of the dirt. Is that Flint Ridge? Flint?
Something dragged down. It doesn't.
Oh yeah,
I don't see it.
glacial piece.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any real attributes that show that it was worked, but
Damn.
it's definitely chert.
Nothing. Chert. Schist, it's nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, the Great Hopewell Road. And great it is.
This is irony, right? Is that what this is?
Yeah, I think it is. Wow.
Or
that's
sarcasm.
awesome.
Better not be sarcasm.
Yeah. Wouldn't dream of it. Kale will do an amazing animation. 10 sets of talking about walls or until failure. Bro, can you spot me? I'm about to talk about walls for 45 minutes. It's like a normal forest, and that's about it. So with that understood, you may be asking yourself a very logical question, and that would be why there's a UPS truck in my driveway right now. Yeah, you can just throw it through the window. And incorporates oh my God. Jesus, that guy can talk. My God.